Young people worldwide complain they can't make ends meet and envy their parents' generation. Is it really that bad? Spend a couple of hours watching reels and TikToks from and about Zoomers, and you'll start to feel genuinely concerned for Generation Z, especially those living in prosperous regions like Europe, the UK, Canada, or the USA. They struggle to afford basic necessities like food and housing. We explored why Zoomers are reluctant to work like their parents did, and whether the economy is truly as dire as they claim. To stay updated with our reviews and topics, subscribe to our channel. In early April, a TikTok video surfaced that became a sort of manifesto for angry youth. A young American named Nicholas Summers, almost shouting, explains that despite earning more than 3 minimum wages, about $25 an hour, he's barely surviving on that income.
Can somebody explain to me in crayon-eating terms why I make over 3 times the federal minimum wage and I cannot afford to live? And I do not want to hear the pull yourself up from your bootstraps, work 90 hours a week. That's not the goal, guys. That's not. That should not be our standard. When my parents were my age, they both made less than half of what I make, and they lived alone. I cannot afford to live anywhere alone. A 1-bedroom apartment, $1,800. 2-bedroom apartment, $2,200. And do not get me started on what my grandparents were doing. They, $3,000 house. And yes, I understand inflation and all of it that they have been pulling with the Fed. And then I clock out of my shit. I am tired. I have to go home. And I check the news. Another 60 fucking billion to a country nobody can point out on a map. What are we doing? Where has the plot gone? We have lost it, folks.
The video garnered over 10 million views. In the comments, thousands of young people from the US, Canada, and Europe shared similar struggles. They write about how, despite earning above average, they have to sacrifice much and rent housing with roommates. One comment received over 30,000 likes, in which a young TikTok user wrote, "I don't even want to be rich. I just don't want to worry about whether I'll have enough to eat." When asked why people born after the mid-1990s seem to be facing widespread financial difficulties, there are 2 conflicting answers. Depending on your perspective, either capitalism is to blame, or it's the Zoomers and late millennials themselves. Media in developed countries, regardless of their political leanings, agree. In recent years, the market has become increasingly unfavorable for young people. For example, purchasing a home in Vancouver with a mortgage, even before considering taxes and utility payments, would consume 103% of the average family income. In other words, even a typical family living and working in Vancouver can't afford to buy a house there unless they win the lottery. It's even more challenging for young people. The situation is similar in the United States, where since 1965, the average cost of homes has increased by 118%, adjusted for inflation, while household incomes have risen by only 15%. The UK faces a continuous rise in mortgage rates, and in Italy, there's a traditionally high percentage of so-called bamboccioni, adult children who prefer to live with their parents. In 2022, 70% of Italians aged 18 to 34 were still living with their parents. There have even been cases where relatives resorted to legal action to evict them. Recently, Western media highlighted the story of a Canadian student, Tim Chen, who flies from Calgary to Vancouver twice a week for university classes because it's cheaper than renting an apartment. High mortgage rates and the soaring costs of renting and buying property aren't the only concerns for young people in developed economies.
I've donated plasma 4 times this week, and I still can't pay my bills. God help me.
In the US, for example, food prices have risen by 25% since 2020, outpacing inflation. Education costs continue to climb each year, and healthcare in the US remains the least accessible in the developed world. In the UK, young people are turning down jobs because they can't afford the associated expenses, like dress code compliant clothing and transportation, while in Germany, the percentage of people who can't afford to eat meat or fish daily is growing annually. Generation Z is being forced to adapt. They are delaying starting families, saving less, and frequently seeking ways to hack the system. When describing those born between roughly 1990 and 2005, financial analyst Meredith Whitney dubbed them the avocado toast generation. This is a reference to the popular meme suggesting that young people spend too much on frivolous things like iPhones and trendy cafe breakfasts, and that's why they can't save enough to buy a home. This perspective is common among those who built their wealth in a different economic reality, such as in the early 2000s or 1990s. Another criticism leveled at Zoomers is their alleged lack of work ethic. Employers often complain that the Zoomers they hire are lazy, unwilling to work, and feel entitled. This attitude, they argue, hinders career advancement and, consequently, affects one's financial well-being. However, labeling Zoomers as lazy is not backed by the data. According to CNN, the unemployment rate among Americans aged 16 to 24 in 2023 was just 7.9%, the lowest since 1953. Experts interviewed by the network even described the economic conditions for young workers in 2024 as better than ever. But everything falls apart due to high prices and inflation, which, as Bloomberg notes, demotivates Zoomers more than any other group. Generation Z simply isn't willing to dedicate their lives to work. The idea of spending their entire lives in a 9-to-5 job is daunting to them.
So it literally takes me, I leave here, I get on the train at 7:30 and I don't get home till 6:15 earliest. And then I don't have time to do anything. I want to shower, eat my dinner and go to sleep. I don't have time or energy to cook my dinner either. I don't have energy to work out. That's out the window.
Some people on TikTok roasted this girl saying that this is real life, just being over dramatic and all that. But many also supported her, saying her feelings are valid and that they feel the same way. Personally, as someone who used to commute 2 hours to work and 2 hours back to home for 5 days a week, I can totally relate to this girl. I remember that the only time I got to run errands or get personal stuff done was on the weekends only. Basically, I barely had a life. One of the top comments that really got to me is this one. My father worked all his life, couldn't wait to retire at 62. He died 9 months later. Her feelings are valid. I think it's pretty obvious that something needs to change.
As The Economist highlights, Generation Z now spends 25% less time working than millennials did at the start of their careers in 2007. For Zoomers, a career is no longer the central focus of their lives, and there are valid reasons for this shift. How can anyone seriously sit in an office for 40 hours a week when others are earning huge sums from seemingly simple activities? Selling nude photos on OnlyFans, streaming video games on Twitch, or arbitraging cryptocurrencies. In other words, when there are people who hack the system and achieve financial success much faster, or at least with more enjoyment. Take the example of Canadian streamer Pinky Doll, who in 2023 was earning up to $7,000 a day from NPC, non-player character streams, where she pretended to be a video game character, repeating phrases like gang gang and ice cream so good in response to viewer donations.
Gang gang. Ice cream so good. Go crazy, go crazy.
This kind of path has never seemed so tempting and accessible, especially when regular jobs don't allow for future planning or meeting basic needs in the face of rising costs. According to the analytics firm Morning Consult, more than 57% of Generation Z members aspire to become influencers. They view creating content for social media as a viable and relatively easy career path, one worth abandoning traditional jobs for. Another example is a group of American students who dropped out of college, started an OnlyFans account, and began hosting financial domination sessions, a BDSM practice where one person controls another's spending. A documentary was made about them. The director later remarked, "We were shocked to discover that this seems to be the most effective way for them to achieve the American dream, which is now nearly out of reach for Generation Z." While some are trying to hack the system, others are actively resisting it. According to interviews with the New York Post and Business Insider, Generation Z is the first to prioritize values and principles over corporate culture, even willing to abandon their careers due to political beliefs. These beliefs are often left-leaning. Research from the British think tank, the Institute of Economic Affairs, shows that 2/3 of young Britons want to live in a socialist system, while 8 out of 10 blame capitalism for the housing crisis. In the US, studies by Axios and Momentive reveal that most young people are disillusioned with capitalism, and a recent Business Insider survey found that Zoomers are eager to transform the American economic system into something more just. For these ideological Zoomers, traditional consumerism is giving way to conscious consumption. A survey by the British research firm YouGov found that young Europeans are willing to forego cars, new clothes, and even having children in order to save the planet. In some countries, alternative lifestyles like living in trailers, communes, or squatting in abandoned buildings are gaining popularity. While calls to eat the rich from underage TikTok users are mostly treated as jokes today, a recent issue of The Economist, which was entirely dedicated to Generation Z, highlights that Zoomers' concerns about global issues like the environment are part of a significant trend. According to the magazine's authors, these concerns aren't going away and will likely shape global politics as Zoomers mature and step into leadership roles. What do you think? Are Zoomers right, and should millennials adopt some of their views? Share your thoughts in the comments.